Growing up, my mother was a ghost I could touch but never know. She sat day after day, her empty eyes staring into a void that no one else could see. The doctors called it catatonia, a mysterious collapse of the mind. For 25 years, my mother had been like this, locked away in an asylum, unreachable. My father couldn't bear it. He left when I was just a child, unable to cope with the overwhelming burden of my mother's condition. His absence cast a heavy shadow over our lives, a silent echo that filled our empty home. He often seemed lost, struggling with feelings he couldn't articulate, and in search of peace, he chose a life far removed from ours. While he fled from the pain, my grandmother stepped in to care for me, filling the silence with her stories and wisdom. I chose my career because of my mother, though I would never openly admit it. Psychiatry had become both my refuge and my rebellion. If I could help others, maybe I could make up for my inability to help her. I built my life around it, my long shifts at the hospital, my research into neurological trauma, my careful control over the boundary between professional empathy and personal involvement. Everything was neat, clinical, and locked tightly away. Mark, my boyfriend, had a different take on it. He worked as an architect, and his projects were all about the tangible, foundations, structures, things you could see taking shape. He didn't understand why I spent hours poring over clinical records after work, trying to crack open mysteries that had long been declared unsolvable. He wanted a life that was simple, stable. You know, something you can actually build, he'd say, with a pained smile. Our apartment, which he had meticulously decorated, was full of light and clean lines, soft beige and calming greens. It was a world apart from the dim rooms of the asylum where I still visited my mother weekly, just to sit beside her, hoping one day her vacant gaze would shift, that I might see recognition in her eyes. It had become a point of tension between Mark and me. He thought I was spending too much time there, that it wasn't good for me. "Ellie," he said one night, his voice a mix of frustration and concern as we sat in the living room, a half-eaten takeout dinner in front of us. "It's been 25 years. You need to accept that your mum's gone. She might be breathing, but she's not really here. Don't you think it's time to let go?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I can't just give up, Mark. She's still my mother." Mark looked at me, his eyes softening, and reached across the table to take my hand. "I know. I want you to be okay. You're always so deep in everyone else's pain. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing you to it." His words stayed with me as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to be present for Mark, to give him the kind of normal life he deserved, but I also couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was missing, that I owed my mother more than just acceptance. The hospital had its usual lineup of patients with histories that read like a collective nightmare. Addiction, psychosis, severe traumas, the faces and stories all blurred together most days. But one patient stood out. Simon. Simon had been admitted a few months ago after a breakdown that left him rambling about things that no one could make sense of. His diagnosis was vague, leaning toward dissociative episodes, with paranoid delusions. He had dark, deep-set eyes that seemed to always focus on something beyond what anyone else could see. And unlike my other patients, Simon didn't shy away from talking to me. Simon had a way of unnerving me that none of my other patients did. It wasn't just the things he said, it was the way he said them, his voice soft and almost intimate, as if he was letting me in on a secret. He seemed to enjoy my discomfort, a faint smile always playing on his lips as he spoke. One session, as I sat across from him, his gaze drifted toward the window, his eyes narrowing slightly. "How are you today, Simon?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, a practiced calm that had become second nature. Simon leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the window. "You always start with that question, Dr. Ellie. Every time," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. I nodded. "Routine is comforting for some people. Does it bother you?" He tilted his head as if he was considering it. Not really. He paused, his dark eyes flicking back at me. You're always digging into my life, my past. I think it's only fair I get to know a little about you too. I arched an eyebrow, keeping my expression neutral. This wasn't unusual. Patients often tried to shift focus to avoid uncomfortable topics. This session is about you, Simon, I replied gently. But what exactly are you curious about? Simon's lips curled slightly. You, as a kid. I wonder what kind of little girl grows up to become someone who sits in a room like this, listening to other people's ghosts. I stilled for a moment, my pen pausing mid-tap. What makes you think I have ghosts, Simon? He smiled, his teeth just barely showing. Everyone has ghosts, Doc, especially the ones who think they can help other people deal with theirs. I frowned, adjusting my position in the chair. The silence between us grew heavier, and I forced myself to look directly into his eyes. How have the voices been lately? Simon leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. I bet you were a quiet kid, weren't you? Always watching, always listening. Probably kept to yourself. But you saw things, didn't you? He studied my face, as if searching for a reaction. The voices, Simon, have you heard them today? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head slightly, a faint, almost mocking smile playing on his lips. Honey, can you close the window? It just started raining. I glanced at the window. It was shut tight and the sun was streaming in through the glass. My brow furrowed. Simon, the window is closed. The sun is out. What are you talking about? He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the window, lost somewhere beyond the world we shared. I sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and pity. All right, Simon. We'll continue tomorrow. I slipped my key into the lock and pushed open the door to our apartment, the scent of something savoury filling the air. The soft glow of the kitchen light spilled into the hallway, and I could hear the faint sound of Mark humming to himself. The warmth and coziness of home wrapped around me like a familiar embrace, almost making me forget the weight that had been pressing down on my chest since leaving the hospital. I stepped out of my shoes and padded into the kitchen. Mark stood at the stove stirring a pot, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up to his elbows. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard me, his face lighting up with that warm smile that had always drawn me to him. Hey you, he said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. You're home earlier than I expected. I offered a tired smile in return, leaning against the counter. Yeah, today wasn't too bad. Just Simon. Mark nodded knowingly. Your unsettling patient? Yeah, I murmured, rubbing the back of my neck. He likes to ask questions that make me think too much. Mark's eyes softened. He put the lid back on the pot and walked over, placing a gentle hand on my arm. Well, no more thinking about Simon tonight, okay? I made your favourite, and I even managed to clean the place up. I looked around and noticed how everything seemed to sparkle a little more than usual. The countertops were free of clutter, the floor had been swept, and the living room was perfectly in order. Mark, you didn't have to do all this, I said, my voice softer now. I know you've had a busy week. He shrugged, his smile never fading. I wanted to. I know work has been a lot for you lately. I just thought it'd be nice for you to come home and not have to think about anything but dinner and relaxing. I reached up, brushing my fingers lightly against his cheek. Thank you, really. I hesitated before adding, I'm lucky to have you. He gave me a quick, playful kiss on the forehead. And don't you forget it. He went back to the stove, stirring the pot with an air of satisfaction. Why don't you take a bath and relax? Dinner's going to take a little while, Mark suggested with a gentle smile. I forced a small smile in return, the guilt gnawing at me. You know, that actually sounds lovely. I think I will. I made my way to the hallway to grab a towel, my mind clouded with thoughts I couldn't shake. Just as I reached for the linen closet, Mark's voice echoed from the kitchen. Honey, can you close the window? It just started raining. I froze. The towel slipped from my grasp, falling to the floor with a soft thud. My heart hammered in my chest. My breath caught in my throat. "Mark, what did you say?" My voice was barely a whisper, trembling as I strained to keep my composure. "I just asked if you could close the window in the living room. It just started raining," he repeated casually. I looked out the window, my heart pounding. Raindrops were pattering against the glass, a light drizzle that hadn't been there just moments ago. The sky had shifted, now covered in a dull grey blanket of clouds, the sunlight completely gone. I felt my throat tighten, my breath catching as I stared out, watching the rain. I closed the window, my hands trembling. I could feel my chest tightening, fear settling deep inside me. The walls of the apartment, once comforting, now felt confining, the air too heavy. I took a shaky breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Mark's voice called out from the kitchen again. "Everything all right, Ellie?" I forced myself to speak, swallowing hard. "Yeah, just getting the window." My voice cracked, betraying the unease that I couldn't hide. I quickly grabbed the towel off the floor, gripping it tightly as if that simple action could ground me, could pull me away from the sense of dread settling into my bones. I made my way to the bathroom, my footsteps uneven. I needed space, needed to think. The door clicked shut behind me, and I set the towel on the counter, staring at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked pale, eyes wide, a haunted expression staring back. I turned on the tap, letting the sound of running water fill the room, anything to drown out the thoughts racing through my head. I sank down onto the edge of the tub, hugging myself as I waited for the bath to fill. The rain outside grew heavier, the sound of droplets tapping against the window, reminding me of what I was trying to forget. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital with a familiar knot in my stomach. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating the sterile clinical environment that felt both comforting and suffocating. I made my way to the staff lounge, where I found Laura, my co-worker, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Her curly hair bounced as she turned, and she smiled at me, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "Hey, Ellie, would you like a cup?" she asked, stirring her coffee absently. I forced a smile. "Sure, thank you." As I rifled through my schedule for the day, I spotted Simon's name. The thought of facing him again sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated before approaching Laura, feeling a strange urgency. "Laura, do you think I could ask you to take today's session with Simon?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I felt the tremor creeping in. Laura's smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a look of curiosity. "Did Simon get under your skin?" she asked, her tone light but probing. "Ellie, I get it. He does that to everyone eventually. He's a master at weaving webs of intrigue and doubt, especially for those of us who think we have a grip on our emotions." She paused, setting her coffee cup down. "But you're a good psychiatrist. You know how to handle him. Just be strict, lay down the boundaries, and don't let him toy with your mind." Her words were meant to reassure me, but they did little to dispel the growing sense of dread that was coiling tighter within me. I nodded, forcing a smile in return. "I know, you're right." I took a moment to scroll through my phone in the staff lounge, the soft glow illuminating the quiet corners of the room. Mark had sent me an article about a stunning new architectural project, the intricate designs leaping off the screen. A smile tugged at my lips as I imagined him passionately explaining every detail, his eyes lighting up with excitement. But then, as I swiped, I noticed the date glaring back at me, and a sudden wave of realization washed over me. Next week was my grandmother's birthday. A warm rush of nostalgia enveloped me at the thought of her, the way her laughter danced in the air like a gentle breeze, and how she always brewed the perfect cup of lavender tea. I could almost smell it now, a comforting blend that filled her cozy kitchen and wrapped around us like a cherished memory. I knew I should drive up to visit her. She deserved more than just fleeting phone calls. I had been meaning to make more time for her, but life had a way of pulling me into its relentless current. I took a final sip of my coffee, the rich flavour bittersweet on my tongue, and stood up, the cup clattering softly against the table as I set it down. I walked down the hallway, the the soft squeak of my shoes on the linoleum floor echoing around me. I paused just outside the door to Simon's room, staring at the nameplate for a moment longer than necessary. Laura's words echoed in my mind. Don't let him toy with you. I exhaled slowly, pushing the door open. Simon was already seated, his hands resting casually on the table. His eyes met mine as I walked in, and there was that familiar flicker of something behind them. Amusement? Curiosity? Whatever it was, it unnerved me. He smiled as I took my seat, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "Good morning, Dr. Ellie," he said, his voice dripping with politeness. "You look tired." I ignored the comment, slipping into my professional demeanour. "Morning, Simon. How are you feeling today?" I asked, my voice as neutral as I could manage. Simon tilted his head slightly. "I think today is a day of echoes," he said, his eyes unfocused. "It's strange, don't you think? The way some days feel more real than others, as if they were happening again for the first time." He paused, his gaze flicking back to mine, a faint smile curling at his lips. "But then, you already know that, don't you, Doctor?" I kept my expression steady, refusing to be drawn in. "Can you explain what you mean by echoes?" Simon rested his hand beneath his chin, his brow furrowing as he squinted, lost in contemplation. "Do you like to sing, Dr. Ellie?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I paused, glancing at my notes. "Sing?" "Not really. Could you elaborate, Simon?" He nodded slowly, a strange light in his eyes. "Yeah, the echoes. There's one in particular I've been hearing lately. It's familiar in a way, a woman's voice." He turned his head, meeting my eyes, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "She sings tenderly of her beloved Elizabeth, whose enchanting, sparkling, deep blue eyes glimmer like jewels." A chill raced through me, my heart pounding in my chest. Very few people knew my true name, only my parents ever used it. Perhaps he had just stumbled upon it by chance. After all, it wasn't impossible to guess. Besides, my eyes are hazel, not blue. He was just rambling again. "What do you mean she sings about Elizabeth?" I tried to keep my voice calm, professional. Simon's demeanour shifted abruptly, the glimmer of mischief in his dark eyes vanishing as he leaned back in his chair, his posture becoming oddly slumped. His voice, once playful and conspiratorial, turned flat and distant. "You really want to know, Dr. Ellie?" he asked, his tone now heavy with fatigue. I blinked, taken aback by the sudden change. "Yes, I do. Can you tell me more about the voice? Is it someone you know?" He sighed. "These sessions always feel the same. You come in, ask your questions, dig into my life, but what about you? You keep asking me to explain things, to share, but I don't want to play that game anymore." "Simon, I'm here to help," I replied, trying to draw him back in. "If you're feeling overwhelmed, we can talk about that." He shook his head, his eyes darting around the room, now filled with a sudden disinterest. "But Simon, the voices—" "Stop," he interrupted, a sharp edge creeping into his voice. "I'm tired of your questions, Ellie. All the time with the questions. What do you really know about me, about what goes on in my head?" He leaned forward slightly, and I could feel the tension radiating from him. "You see the horror in my past and think you understand. But it's a joke, really. You're the psychiatrist, but I can see you're just as lost as the rest of us." The sudden shift in tone startled me, leaving me grappling for control. "I want to help you," I insisted, my voice rising slightly in urgency. "That's why we're here. That's why Why you what?" he snapped, cutting me off. "Why you spend hours reading my files, listening to my ramblings. You think you can save me? Maybe I don't want to be saved. Maybe I just want to be left alone to rot in this forgotten corner." His words pierced through the professional facade I'd been maintaining, and I felt a flicker of anger and frustration flare up inside me. "I'm not here to judge you, Simon. I just want to understand what you're going through. If you would let me let you," he echoed, a cruel smile breaking across his face. "Let you ask your questions and poke around in my brain like some sort of lab rat." I'm tired, Ellie. Tired of all of it. Tired of being your puzzle to solve. The air between us grew thick with tension. I could feel the walls closing in, and for a moment I lost my footing. You're pushing me away, I said, struggling to keep my composure. We've made progress. Don't throw it all away. Simon leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, the playful glint in his eyes replaced with a hardened resolve. You want to see progress? Ask me something real, something that matters, not this nonsense about voices or my past. What if I told you I can see through the facade you wear every day? Confusion washed over me. What do you mean? What facade? He chuckled darkly, and it sent a chill down my spine. You pretend you're fine, that your life is all neat and tidy, but you're just as haunted as I am, Ellie. And you can't help me when you're still wrestling with your own ghosts. You think you can read me, Simon? I asked, trying to regain control. You don't know me. You only see what you want to see. Do I? He asked, a hint of mockery returning to his tone. Or do I see right through you? Every question you ask is just a way to distract yourself from the real questions that need answering. Like why you feel the need to come here every week, hoping to find something in me that you've lost in yourself. The room felt colder, as if he'd sucked all the warmth out of it. I wanted to retort, to push back, but instead, silence engulfed us. The air was heavy, and the fluorescent lights flickered above, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Finally, I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to remain steady. We're here to help you, Simon. You can't just shut down like this. I need you to engage with me. Tell me what you're feeling. I told you. I'm tired. Tired of questions. Tired of the act. I'm done. The finality in his voice echoed in my ears, and as he leaned back, closing himself off, I realized that maybe I had underestimated the depth of the darkness lurking in his mind, and perhaps my own. In that moment, I knew this session was far from over, but I also felt a nagging doubt. Was I prepared to confront my own shadows while trying to help someone else with theirs? Fine, I said, my voice shaking with uncertainty. We'll stop with the questions for now. Simon nodded, a semblance of satisfaction crossing his face. Good. Maybe we can just sit in silence for a while. The echoes are more comforting that way. A few days later, I was finally on my way to Grandma's house, the anticipation bubbling within me like a pot ready to boil over. The late morning sun poured through the car window, casting warm rays that filled the interior with a golden glow. I could already envision her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she saw me. As I pulled onto the familiar winding road leading to her house, I reached for my phone. I wanted to let her know I was on my way. The familiar chime rang, and I dialed her number, excitement buzzing in my veins. Hello, sweetheart. Grandma's voice came through the line, bright and cheerful as always. Hi, Grandma. I'm just a few minutes away, I said, my heart soaring at the sound of her warm greeting. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm dropping off some fresh flowers at Grandpa's, she said, her tone light yet carrying an undertone of sentiment. Should I pick you up on the way? I asked, a hint of concern in my voice. No, dear, she chuckled softly. It's just a short walk. I'll be home before you get here. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Okay, I'll see you soon. Absolutely. I'll see you soon, Ellie. I have something tasty waiting for you. I already knew it was her famous cherry pie, the one she always saved for our special visits. As I parked in the driveway and stepped out of the car, I inhaled the familiar scents of grass and blooming flowers that danced in the gentle breeze. Grandma's house was like a comforting embrace, its wooden facade weathered yet charming, with the vibrant garden spilling over with colours, each bloom a testament to her nurturing touch. I made my way to the front door, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin. Before I could knock, the door swung open, and there she was, my grandma. Her white hair was neatly pulled back into a bun, and she wore her favourite floral dress, which always seemed to reflect her sunny personality. There's my girl, she exclaimed, enveloping me in a hug that felt like home. You're getting taller every time I see you. I chuckled, returning her embrace with equal warmth. And you're getting more fabulous as always. She laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Flattery will get you everywhere. Come in, come in! She ushered me inside, the comforting aroma of cherry pie wafting through the air. Is that the famous pie I smell? I teased, already feeling my mouth water. Of course, but first how about a cup of lavender? She set a kettle on the stove and moved around the kitchen with ease, her movements graceful despite her age. Perfect, I replied, settling down at the kitchen table. I watched her as she hummed an old tune while preparing the tea, her presence a soothing balm against my restless mind. Once we settled at the table, Grandma served us both steaming cups. So, where is that handsome boyfriend of yours? She asked, leaning in with genuine curiosity. Mark? Yeah, he's super busy with work right now. He's trying to get his own architecture firm off the ground, so he's always swamped. We chatted about everything and nothing, her garden, my work, and the little joys that make life worth living. But soon a flicker of nostalgia danced in her eyes and she suddenly brightened. Oh, I know, wait here. Before I could respond, she was off, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. I took a moment to savour the comforting atmosphere, the soft light filtering through the lace curtains and the gentle sound of birds chirping outside. A moment later, she returned, an old photograph album cradled in her hands. Let's see what memories we can find, she said, flipping the album open. The pages creaked gently, revealing snapshots of our family through the years. As we turned the pages, I admired their youthful faces, capturing the joy of life in the way only photographs can. There was a picture of Grandpa Henry at the beach, sunbathing with a carefree smile, his hair tousled by the wind. Another showed him holding a large fish, grinning ear to ear. He was quite the fisherman back in the day, Grandma said, chuckling softly. Flipping through the pages, something drew my attention. A photograph tucked between a snapshot of my mother and one of Grandma tending to her vibrant garden. It was an unexpected picture of a little girl, her laughter seemingly captured in time. Who's that? I asked, my curiosity piqued as I leaned closer, trying to place the familiar yet distant face. That's you, silly! Grandma exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with delight. You had such beautiful blue eyes when you were young. No, that wasn't right. It couldn't be right. I felt my breath catch, my chest tightening as I looked down at the picture. The child smiling back at me had bright blue eyes that seemed almost unnaturally vivid, piercing through the years. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. It felt like a thread had been pulled loose inside me, unravelling everything. The rest of the afternoon passed in a daze. Grandma's voice became a distant murmur, and her familiar warmth felt like it was coming from miles away. I laughed when I should have, nodded in agreement, but inside, fear twisted tighter and tighter, cold fingers wrapping around my heart. By the time I left, darkness had fallen, a dull grey sky looming overhead. I hugged Grandma tightly, but I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. The drive home was quiet, the rhythmic patter of the rain on the windshield barely keeping me grounded. I started to feel dizzy. The world around me was hazy, blurred edges fading into clarity, like waking from a dream I couldn't remember. I blinked, and the dull light of the room began to sharpen. The air felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. Across from me sat Simon, his eyes dark and unyielding, watching me closely. I frowned, trying to sit up straighter, my head pounding slightly from the effort. "Welcome back, Ellie," Simon said softly, his voice gentle but carrying an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. I blinked at him, trying to remember what we had been discussing. My gaze dropped to the table between us, where an old photograph album lay open, the pages yellowed with age. It didn't belong here. "What is this?" I asked, my voice coming out harsher than I intended. My fingers twitched, wanting to close the album, to get it out of sight. Simon didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, a small, enigmatic smile on his lips. "We're trying to go back, remember?" The photograph on the open page showed a little girl, her blue eyes sparkling, her face lit up with laughter. A cold feeling settled in my chest, my heart tightening as I stared at it. "Do you recognize it?" Simon's voice was soft, almost coaxing. He tilted his head, his gaze never leaving me. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. That's me," I said, barely above a whisper. My fingers brushed against the edge of the photograph, the surface cool under my touch. Memories stirred, just out of reach, like a name on the tip of my tongue that I couldn't quite grasp. "Yes," Simon murmured, his voice encouraging. "We're trying to help you remember." I shook my head again, more forcefully this time, trying to clear the fog. "No, I don't. Simon, you're not making sense," I said, my voice cracking slightly. I forced my eyes away from the album, meeting his gaze. His expression was calm, patient, like he was waiting for me to catch up to something he already understood. "We do this sometimes," he said, his tone gentle, almost comforting. "To help you go back, to find the pieces you've lost. Today it seems to be working." I stared at him, my mind racing. His words felt wrong, like they didn't belong here. I was supposed to be in control, supposed to be guiding him through his delusions, but his eyes were so steady, so knowing. The room around me felt different, smaller, the walls pressing in. I looked down at my hands, realizing they were trembling slightly. "I think you're confused, Simon," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to regain some semblance of control. "This session is about you." Simon just smiled, his gaze softening. "It's okay to feel disoriented," he said quietly. I didn't like how he spoke to me, like I was the one who needed help. I was supposed to be asking the questions, supposed to be the one in control. But the album was still there, the photograph staring back at me. I turned another page, my breath catching as I saw a picture of my mother. She was sitting with me in her lap, her eyes vacant, her expression hollow. "Your mother," Simon said softly. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. "This isn't right," I said, shaking my head. I looked up at Simon, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't realized were forming. "Why do you have this? Where did this come from?" Simon leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest, gentle. "We're just trying to help you remember, Ellie. You've been holding on to these fragments for so long, but today it seems like you're finally starting to piece them together." I turned the page again, my hands trembling. There was another photo of her, holding my younger self. Her expression was distant, a hollow shell of the woman I remembered. The memory stirred something within me, something dark and painful, something that didn't quite add up. "I need to see her," I said suddenly. The urgency came from somewhere deep inside, a place I hadn't touched in years. "I need to go and see my mother right now." Simon's expression didn't change. He watched me for a moment, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. Slowly, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "Ellie," he began, his voice softer than before. "Your mother. She's gone." I blinked at him, my heart skipping a beat. I shook my head as if to shake off the words. "No, that's not true. She's at the asylum. I visit her." I insisted, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. I felt the panic rising in my chest, my thoughts beginning to spiral. "I visit her every week, Simon." Simon's gaze didn't waver. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if he expected this response. He spoke slowly, his words deliberate, as if he knew each one would hurt. "Ellie? Your mother died 25 years ago. She's been gone for a long time." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "That's what put you in this deep sleep, this place where you've been for so many years." No, that couldn't be right. I remembered her. I remembered sitting beside her bed, her hollow gaze, the way I'd hold her hand, hoping for a flicker of recognition. "No," I whispered. "Why are you doing this to me, Simon?" Simon waited, his gaze never leaving mine, his expression calm, steady. He nodded again, as if he had expected this too. "It's okay to feel this way," he said softly. "It's okay to be afraid. You've carried this for so long, and letting go isn't easy. But you're not alone, Ellie. We're here to help you." I looked down at the album, the photographs blurring as tears spilled down my cheeks. I wiped at them furiously, trying to clear my vision, but the ache wouldn't go away. The silence in the room felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, trying to find some piece of solid ground to stand on. But all I could feel was the hollow ache, the realization that everything I had believed, everything I had held on to, was slipping away. "I need to leave," I said suddenly, my voice cracking. I pushed myself up, my movements shaky and uncoordinated. "I need to get out of here, Simon. I need to see Mark." I stumbled toward the door, my heart racing. My hand grasped the handle, but it didn't turn. I pulled harder, panic rising in my chest as I realized it was locked. "Why is this locked?" I shouted, my voice trembling, a mixture of fear and anger. Simon remained seated, his expression calm, though I could see the sadness in his eyes. He didn't move to stop me. He just watched, as if he knew what was coming. "I need to leave," I repeated, my voice more desperate now. "I need to call Mark. He'll come get me. He'll help me. Please." Simon shook his head, a soft sigh escaping his lips. "Ellie," he said gently, "Mark isn't real. He never was." No, you're lying," I whispered. The room around me seemed to spin, the walls closing in until there was nothing but darkness, pressing in from all sides. The photographs in the album, my mother's hollow eyes, Mark's gentle touch, all blurred together in my mind, fragments of memories I couldn't trust. I felt myself slipping away, the world fading, my mind retreating back to that safe, quiet place where none of this could hurt me. The panic, the confusion, the emptiness, it all began to dissolve, replaced by a numbing stillness, only darkness. So much darkness. The room was quiet now, the air heavy with the remnants of what had just transpired. Laura stepped in, her footsteps careful, her eyes immediately finding Simon. "How is she?" she asked, her voice low, a mix of concern and curiosity. Simon looked at Ellie, her eyes vacant once more, her body slumped back in the chair. He sighed, a weariness settling into his features. The photograph album, the memories. It was too overwhelming. "She's gone again." Laura gave him a small, understanding smile, resting a hand on his shoulder. "One day,